Empires are not always destroyed. Sometimes they are sold. Not with explosions, not with invasion, but with signatures. After World War II, Britain faced a decision. It could keep its empire, or it could survive. It chose survival. At the end of World War II in 1945, Britain stood among the victors. Nazi Germany had been defeated. Europe was liberated. The British flag still flew across vast territories around the world. On the map, the empire appeared intact. It stretched from Asia to Africa, from the Middle East to the Pacific. But beneath that appearance, Britain faced a devastating financial reality. 6 years of total war had drained the British economy. The country had spent enormous sums on weapons, military operations, and defense. Cities had been bombed. Infrastructure was damaged. Industries were exhausted from constant wartime production. Most importantly, Britain was broke. Its gold reserves were nearly gone. Overseas investments had been sold to fund the war. The country owed large debts, especially to the United States. During the war, Britain had depended heavily on American support. Through programs like Lend-Lease, the United States provided weapons, equipment, food, and supplies. This support was essential for Britain's survival. But in 1945, when the war ended, that support stopped suddenly. Britain still needed to import food, raw materials, and essential goods, but it no longer had the money to pay for them. Without immediate financial assistance, Britain faced economic collapse. The only country capable of providing that assistance was the United States. Britain had no choice but to negotiate. In 1946, Britain secured a massive loan from the United States. This was crucial to stabilize the British economy and prevent disaster. But the loan came with conditions. These conditions would reshape global power. One key requirement was that Britain had to dismantle its system of imperial economic control. For decades, Britain maintained a network where its colonies traded primarily with Britain. This ensured economic flow into the empire. The United States wanted access to these markets. American policymakers believed global trade should be open, not restricted within empires. They wanted American companies to sell goods freely across the world, including in former British territories. To receive the loan, Britain agreed to reduce its economic control over its empire. This weakened the financial foundation of imperial power. At the same time, global financial systems were shifting toward the US dollar. International trade increasingly relied on American currency. American banks gained influence. American industries expanded into global markets. Britain still had political control over its colonies, but its economic dominance was fading. The empire was no longer financially sustainable. Britain had preserved its survival, but the cost was its empire. The consequences of the 1946 Anglo-American loan became clear almost immediately. Britain had accepted financial help, but the conditions attached to that help began reshaping the global economy. One of the most important conditions was the introduction of sterling convertibility. Under this requirement, the British pound had to become freely exchangeable for US dollars. In theory, this was meant to encourage global trade and financial stability. In reality, it exposed Britain's weak economic position. When the convertibility rule took effect in 1947, countries holding British pounds rushed to exchange them for dollars. Nations across the world trusted the American economy more than the weakened British one. Within weeks, Britain's dollar reserves began disappearing rapidly. The British government was forced to suspend convertibility after only a short period. The financial pressure was simply too intense. This crisis revealed the new balance of power in the world economy. The United States controlled the strongest currency, the largest industrial economy, and the majority of global gold reserves. Britain, despite winning the war, had become dependent on American financial support. At the same time, maintaining the empire became increasingly expensive. Colonies required administration, security, and economic management. With limited financial resources, Britain struggled to sustain this global system. Independence movements were also growing stronger. In India, political pressure forced Britain to grant independence in 1947. Other territories began demanding similar changes. The empire that once generated wealth for Britain was now becoming a financial burden. Slowly, Britain began withdrawing from its imperial responsibilities. By the early 1950s, the shift in global power was undeniable. The United States had become the center of the international economic system. The dollar dominated global trade. American industries supplied markets across the world. Britain remained an important nation, but it no longer controlled the global financial structure. The final confirmation of this change came during the Suez Crisis in 1956. When Britain attempted to maintain its influence in the Middle East by intervening in Egypt, the United States opposed the action. Instead of supporting Britain, the American government used financial pressure to force Britain to withdraw. The message was clear. Global power had shifted. Britain could no longer act independently without considering American economic influence. The empire that once ruled global trade routes and controlled vast territories had quietly passed its leadership role to another power. This transition did not occur through conquest. It happened through finance, currency, and economic systems. The British Empire had not been destroyed in battle. It had been replaced in the global order, and the new center of power was Washington, not London.